My guest on Dan's Talks today is Eve Karlin, the author of a new book called Track 61, which is about one of the most dramatic events that ever took place here on the East End, namely the only time that Nazis landed in America took place here and also in Florida during World War II. And it's quite a topic. I don't know if they still do it, but for a number of years, the Coast Guard station in Amagansett was holding reenactments of this. And that's where it took place. So that's why they did that. Tell us a little bit about the book. It's called Track 61, when it came out, and why you decided to write about it.
Well, I grew up in Amagansett, and I always had heard my whole life about this event that happened in 1942. But I came about writing the book in a slightly different way because I was fascinated and am fascinated with New York City history. And my first novel was about a murder that took place in Manhattan in 1800. So as I searched around for a topic for a second book, I was kind of fascinated by Grand Central, which I consider just a fabulous, fabulous place with lots of hidden secrets. When I learned that there was a secret sub-basement in Grand Central that was targeted in 1942 by Nazi saboteurs, all at once, a story fell into place because I realized that the men they were speaking about, the saboteurs, were those four individuals who had landed on the beach in Amagansett, steps away from where I grew up as a child. And I had heard about them my whole life, and it just seemed like an immediate connection, something that I really had a personal connection to.
Well, describe what took place. It was during the night.
Yes. June 13th, 1942, just after midnight. It's impossible almost to believe when you stand on the beach in Amagansett that a U-boat came ashore, came close to shore, about 100 feet offshore, and four men disembarked, came to shore. They were on a sabotage mission against the United States. On the beach that night, they landed with a lot of dynamite, and they were to bury the dynamite in the dunes. But just shortly after they landed, they were intercepted on the beach by a patrolman, John Cullen. And go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So they kind of bluffed a story with him, and because he was alone and they were four men, and they evaded him that evening and they got away. Although Cullen did go back to the Coast Guard station, the station that now has been beautifully renovated and placed back in its original location off Atlantic Beach, and he alerted the Coast Guard to this kind of unusual. He didn't realize at the time who they were or what they were doing, but he felt it was suspicious.
Well, I think they were speaking a foreign language to each other.
That's true. One man, in fact, George Dash, the leader, his German was very poor. They had all lived for many, many years in the United States. But Peter Berger did say something to George Dash in German. That's correct.
Yes. I've been doing research in history too, and one thing I uncovered, which I wondered if you knew about, was that George Dash actually worked in East Hampton.
Oh yes, yeah.
In the summer with his wife.
Correct. Yeah.
Not German. She was she was a Italian American. And they had lived in New York and came out for the summer where he was a professional waiter, the leader.
Yep.
And then, so how did he get to be on a U-boat and coming ashore from Germany?
Yeah, all the men in fact, kind of the man I focus on most is an individual named Peter Berger, who was a naturalized U.S. citizen. So they all were, part of the reason they were chosen was because of their English skills. But, in their early 30s, George, Peter, the others, they went back to Germany, and they were living in Germany when they were kind of coerced into being part of this mission. I think George had a relative that was in the Abwehr, in the kind of the military, the secret military in Germany, who drafted him to be part of this mission.
And tell me, you said you're a local girl, and
Yeah, local girl.
how you became interested in literature and books, like when you were growing up.
Well, I work at BookHampton, as you know, and I worked in publishing for many, many years prior to that. And before that, I was an English major. But I think I've always been a reader.
Where did you
and
go?
I've always read Dan's paper my entire life.
Where did you go? Where did you go to as an English major?
Colgate University.
Yeah, that's a quiet part of the world that got to.
Yes.
So you became interested in history at that time, but you were an English major. Did you study American? American?
The funny thing is that I worked in publishing at Random House for many years.
Oh.
I was reading, and sometimes when you work in publishing and you read fabulous books, and some of them are just mind-boggling, and others you kind of feel like, I could maybe write this. And I was reading Ron Chernow's amazing biography on Alexander Hamilton when I stumbled across this something called the Manhattan Well murder. And when I looked into this murder, which is the topic of my first book, I realized that the well in which a young woman's body was found still existed on Spring Street. And I lived across the street from this well that still exists there at 129 Spring Street. So this story just kind of fell into my lap. A lot of people think that the woman who was murdered is, in fact, a ghost that haunts Spring Street. And I really do feel like she was communicating with me to let her story be known. And in many ways, I feel the same thing about the Nazi saboteurs in Tract 61, because as you know, because you know so much about the story, it's not as apparent as it seems on the surface. These men, a lot of them, once you dig into it a little bit, you become a little bit more sympathetic to the plight of a couple of the men who were really trapped between a rock and a hard place. And I always walk my dog around there in Atlantic Beach, and I couldn't walk there without kind of thinking that basically when these men stepped ashore there, their lives came to an end.
Well, they did for some of them. What became? How did they wind up in many of them being electrocuted? There were 8 in all, 4 in Florida. And how did we round them up? But we both know that's not how it happened. But
absolutely. Well, J. Edgar Hoover has kind of a nefarious kind of persona at this day and age. At the time, he took full credit for capturing all 8 Nazi saboteurs. You have the headlines. And the truth is much different. In fact, they might have very well succeeded in their mission. A lot of people like to tell the story. These are a bunch of, the stories come down. They're a bunch of buffoons. They were, kind of clowns that were never going to succeed. But in fact, 2 of the men turned themselves in. And if not for that, they might very well have succeeded.
What were they up to? What were they going to do?
They were going to destroy bridges. They were going to, the subject of my book focuses on Grand Central and something called M42, which is a secret sub-basement 10 stories below Grand Central Station, whose existence was only revealed in the 1980s. It's not on any map. And the rotary converters that supplied power to trains up and down the East Coast were run out of there. So had they succeeded in, and it would have taken very little to stop those rotary converters, they would have stopped 80% of troop and equipment supplies. And the power from that substation also supplied aluminum plants. And if that had been sabotaged, airplane production would have stopped. So there was, the consequences were enormous.
I had read that an aluminum plant has to stay active or the product will just gel.
Exactly. The electrolyte baths would harden, and it would have taken about a year in order to rebuild them.
So
and in June of 1942, 6 months into the war for the United States, could have changed the entire outcome of the war.
Is there a lot of research been done on this? Ever things like movies or anything that you know?
There are a lot of terrific nonfiction books, especially one by Michael Dobbs. The leader of the Nazi saboteur group that landed in Amagansett, George Dash, wrote a memoir, which is kind of fascinating to read. He was kind of a crazy man. To my knowledge, there's been no movie. And to my knowledge, my book is historical fiction. That this is the first treatment as fiction. It sticks close to the facts, but there's certainly elements that I've introduced to make it a little bit more palatable to people who would not necessarily read a straight history.
I think there's also something to be said about where they landed in Amagansett and what was going on there. There were two government military agencies within 300 yards of where they came ashore.
The Coast Guard station and
the Navy radio station.
Maybe.
And the Navy radio station's job was to track Nazi subs.
But they were off target. It was a very, very foggy night, is my understanding, and they were meant to land in East Hampton. So they did not land exactly where they had intended, and in fact, the sub got grounded.
Wow.
And so it could have, they narrowly escaped capture that night, somehow making their way to New York City on the morning train and arriving in New York on the day of the largest military parade in U.S. history.
Yes. New York at War, it was called.
Yeah, amazing parade to look up the footage. There is really terrific footage on YouTube of that parade. And
there they were. They had changed into fishermen's uniforms, and then they had a whole lot of money with them, and they went out shopping and got. It's quite an amazing story, and I'm glad your book is out. It can be found, I imagine, at the BookHampton and all other bookstores in the area.
Yes.
And track 21 was a Target.
61. Track 61.
And I'm very glad that you've added this bit to the legends of this landing. What are you planning on next? Do you have any plans for another book?
I have plans for another book, always plans for another book. Also another kind of little known piece of American history that I'm fascinated by.
Not talk about it out of luck.
I'm being coy, yeah.
Most writers, including myself, do that because we don't want to spook it.
Yeah.
Or assume that we're not interested in it or something. I don't know what it is. I guess thank you for being on the show, and I'll wish you the best, and I'll see you. There's a weekend festival coming up for mystery writers in April. Can you talk a little about that?
It's a fabulous, fabulous event. I am just on the committee. It's being spearheaded by the mayor in East Hampton, Mayor Jerry Larson, and also another a writer who is now a village trustee, Carrie Doyle. And they have a fabulous roster of crime and mystery writers. It's going to be happening this April 13th. Michael Connolly, Anthony Horowitz, a lot of local writers, Lisa Jewell. It's just going to be a terrific weekend with lots of author panels, also some podcasts, and some other kind of fun, like crime capers.
Thank you for being on the show. I will
Thank you so much for having me.
talk to you soon.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.